kind of almost the first step is even thinking about what sexuality even is. And this gets very existential, because we tend to still, again, think of it as genitals and an action and a behavior and something that we do. Sex is what we do. And I think of it as sex is what we are. It's a part of who we are. And I have a cool activity that I like to do when I do workshops that shows 7 different domains of sexuality. And it's, yes, the sex acts and the body parts and all that stuff is just one of them. And the other things are our emotions, intimacy, our cultural lens, our health, our the power dynamics, the gender, the orientation, all of these things and more coming together. It's really how we walk through life.
I'm Casey Main, a jaded, hopelessly romantic, health-conscious party girl searching for meaning. And my mission is simple: to make life better, for myself and for you. I believe real change always comes from within, and the Better You podcast was born to discover hidden parts of ourselves and our stories. A safe place where we have real, honest conversations with people from all walks of life to help better understand ourselves so we can become better versions of ourselves. So come along on this journey of discovery with me so you can become a better you. Welcome back to another episode of the Better You podcast, where we focus on better understanding our relationship with ourselves. Thank you all so much for being here. Hope everyone is doing well. I am definitely starting to feel the effects of all of this quarantining. I'm starting to get a little bit stir crazy and just really, really craving in-person social interaction. So I am hopeful that we are not far from being able to maybe step back into some normalcy. I just would really love to be able to go sit at a coffee shop and write or work and drink a latte. Getting pretty tired of the coffee I make here. And I know that's just such a little thing, but I'd love to hug my parents. That'd be great. I'd love to be able to see my nieces and nephews. I actually have a brand new nephew up in the DC area who I have not been able to meet yet. He was born during the middle of all of this craziness, and so not sure when I'll get to meet him. That is the first of my niece and nephew births that I was not at. So this has all been a little bit of an adjustment. And yeah, just wanted to vent a little bit because I'm sure you guys are all feeling the same way, that I miss people. I very much miss people. Okay, so let's talk about this episode. Just a warning that this is definitely an adult conversation. So it is not an episode that you want to listen to with children around. So if you're at home, I'd put in some earbuds, or maybe earmark this one to listen to when they go to bed, or maybe are playing outside or whatever. This is just not content you necessarily want them listening to as we are talking about sex, and specifically shame and stigmas surrounding sex. So I believe very much in removing shame when it comes to sex, both societal shame as well as some of the deep-rooted shame that we might have that we aren't even aware of. I don't believe there is anything shameful about sex. We would not have these parts and they wouldn't produce pleasure if we weren't meant to enjoy them. And as we discuss in episode 34, Live Your Best Sex Life with Asharna Walsh, I believe most of us only scratch the surface of the level of pleasure that we are capable of experiencing. And the only way we're going to have a chance of moving down that road of more pleasure is if we open our minds, admit that we don't know everything, and try some new things. And a lot of times it is some level of deep-rooted shame that is holding us back from that. And really, I think that's an important mindset for many more aspects of our life outside of sex. And that's actually something that we talk about in this episode. So this is a two-part episode. I have not done this yet before, a little bit of a new format. So first we will talk to a true sex expert. So she has not one, but 3 degrees in human sexuality, bachelor's, master's, and a PhD. And then after that, we will hear a real life story from someone who spiced up her sex life with her husband by exploring with sex toys. And he was very reluctant at first, and she is just super honest about how she navigated that and what all it did for their relationship. So the first, I would say more than half, 3/4 of this episode are the conversation with our expert guest. And then you'll hear it'll transition into the real life application of some of the stuff that we talk about. Before we get into today's episode, though, I want to make sure you all know about Royal. Royal is a personal care and sexual wellness brand aimed also at destigmatizing sex in a healthy and luxurious way. They've launched multiple product lines of all-natural condoms, an organic lubricant, and vitamin E and aloe-infused body wipes. Their products are all organic, gluten-free, vegan-friendly, no parabens, no glycerin, no harmful chemicals, which sadly, a lot of other condom and lubricant brands cannot say that. In fact, they actually hide their ingredients because the FDA does not require that. Condom companies list their ingredients, which I did not know, and I just think that is super shady and upsetting. So you can listen to episode 25, Next Level Sex Ed, with their founder, Neil Mehta, to learn more about how most mainstream products hide their ingredients and then why Royal is dedicated to complete transparency. And you can actually get a discount on your entire order with Royal by using the code TheBetterYou. So TheBetterYou, all one word, at checkout. So simply go to alwaysberoyal.com and use code TheBetterYou, and you will receive 15% off of your entire order. All right, so let's learn more about today's guest. Dr. Jill McDevitt is a sexologist and sexuality educator, consultant, and coach on a mission to radically improve the way we think about and treat sexuality, ourselves, and each other in the U.S. She believes that sex should be fun, pleasure is good for you, and shame-free expression of our sexuality is a vital part of being human. Dr. Jill has 3 degrees in human sexuality and is the only known person in the whole planet who does. So that's pretty awesome. She also serves as resident sexologist for CalExotics, which is the leading pleasure products company. And in this episode, we discuss what it means to be a sexologist, why sexuality is not talked about more, the negative messaging regarding sexuality that most of us grow up with, and then the implications of that in our adult life, gender differences in how we experience stigmas, shame, and pressure surrounding sex, how to identify when shame is present in our sex life and begin to unravel it, a much broader definition of sexuality and how it can help us identify underlying issues throughout our lives, where our very strict narrative of what sex is comes from and how it may be holding us back from experiences we may really enjoy, her opinion on toys, porn, and open relationships, and how the concept of paying it forward can help remove shame from sexuality. So that is it. I really hope that you guys enjoy this conversation. And again, stay tuned all the way through the end to then hear a just real life application of some of the things that we talk about. All right, so that's it. Let's hop into this conversation with Dr. Jill. Your background and your education and your experience and like what exactly it means to be a sexologist.
Yeah. Sexology is simply the scientific study of human sexual behavior. And it's been something I've been interested in since I was a teenager. And there's many different ways people can go about getting into the field. I wanted to do it in a very direct way. So I went here, there, and everywhere to find a bachelor's, a master's, and a PhD program in human sexuality so that I could study it at that level. But there's other ways that people can get into the field as well. Some come in through psychology backgrounds or nursing or women's studies or things like that.
Okay. Do the degrees look at both the physical and the psychological component? I'm assuming yes, but
Yes, and more so the social even, and
ooh.
how that all comes together. It's a very interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary field, which is one of the things I love about it, is because sexuality permeates so many other aspects of our lives and vice versa. So it really needs to know a lot about a lot of things.
That's so true. And, it's interesting that you make the comment that you had to kind of really look to find all of those degrees. And I mean, that's incredible that you have a bachelor's, master's, and PhD. Is it not a common degree? Like, do a lot of universities not offer those, especially like the higher levels of education within human sexuality?
That's correct, although it is burgeoning, which is heartening to me. When I was graduating high school and looking into programs, there was exactly one in the entire continent of North America. It was in Canada, and that's where I ended up going. Now there are 87, I believe, including the University of Kansas, which never in my high school imagination did I think, somewhere in Kansas would be offering a bachelor's degree in sexuality. So it really is a field that's growing, that has more interest, but it's not nearly as prolific as I would like it to be. And I think that still speaks to the stigma that is on sexuality, kind of the raised eyebrows of, can this even be something that's serious and a scientific field of study, which of course it is, but it's still questions that are asked.
Yeah, unfortunately, of course they are. So, all right, well, I want to get into all of that, but first, I'm sure people are wondering, like, as a sexologist, like, what is it exactly that you do?
Yeah. What's cool about the work is that it really changes over my whole career. I'm in my 13th year as an independent small business owner, and my day-to-day life and year to year has really changed a lot. I've done everything from doing trainings at colleges, like doing the college lecture circuit and doing talks on rape culture or female orgasm, to having a private practice where I meet with couples and individuals, to writing and blogging and supporting female-owned sex toy company like CalExotics, and that I support, books, writing, talking to journalists. Right now is a lot of my job about how to manage sex and dating during quarantine. So it really varies. It keeps things interesting for sure.
I love it. I love all of it. And all right, so I want to start to talk about some of the cultural shame and stigmas, because it's very real. It's very prevalent. And I kind of have like a perfect example. So you and I first found out about you because you helped contribute to an article I wrote for Pop Sugar on how to give a great blowjob. Mm-hmm. And that was the first real kind of sex-centered article I've written. And so it was just really interesting as I kind of like posted it just onto my socials and like my outlets, some of the feedback I got back. And one very good friend of mine messaged me and she's like, I can't believe like you wrote this. Like, I can't even with this article. And I was just so shocked that she was so shocked by it. Cause if you read it, like, yes, there were actual sexual tips in there, but it's not like, it doesn't have to be this like dirty, shameful, wrong thing. So it's just, I think there's a lot of kind of negative views still towards sex, or even just talking about sex. Like, it's kind of this secret thing that exists, just within the bedroom, and who knows if people are even really talking about it in there. So walk us through some of the most common or kind of reasons for some of the cultural shame and stigmas surrounding sex and talking about sex.
Thank you for sharing that story, because I don't always get to witness those types of things for people who aren't sex educators or sexologists. So to feel folks who are coming from other perspectives, like as a writer and as a journalist, and the pushback and what you got. Yes, it's really everywhere. It's relentless, for lack of a better term. So everything, if you can think of it, there's pushback against it, and there's a stigma around it, around sexuality. Everything from, and sometimes they change. Like, there used to be a stigma on online dating. I met my husband online 12 years ago. At that time, that was a little weird. And there was like, people were like, that's kind of like a desperate move. And now, like, this is what people do all day, is just kind of play on the dating app. So So stigmas on things like that. Obviously, masturbation, we still have so much slut shaming. Menstruation shame is still really common. Sexual activity in general, but especially for folks who are older, like the stigma and the ageism for like older women, for instance, like being interested or having questions about sexuality, being sexual, wearing clothes that they find makes them feel sexy. There's a lot of stigma on that. Of course, STI stigma is still prevalent. I mean, it goes on and on. Masturbation, sex toys. I mean, even in my field, even within the sexology community, and we all know this, I've had, people privately say, like, the direction of my career, working with places like CalExotics, talking about sex toys, talking to folks like you in your article on blowjob tips, saying you can't also then do work in things like sexual violence prevention or working for a nonprofit on sexual, health prevention stuff, because that's stigmatized even in the field for some of my colleagues. So, and some organizations. So there's still a lot of stigma for sure.
Yeah. And it's so interesting because I think everybody for the most part recognizes that sex is a very important component within a relationship. And that is somewhat talked about, but it's almost like that is just then gets completely overshadowed by all the negative stigmas. Like, why are we not? And I think there's been a change in that, and maybe especially after all this quarantine, there will be, because I've read a couple things that there's been this like huge increase in sex toy sales. So hopefully people are broadening their horizons while in quarantine. But it's just so interesting to me that we recognize the importance of sex within a relationship, and then hopefully also with just ourselves, although that probably not as much. Yet we don't. Yeah, it's like it's not okay to talk about it. Like, where does that stem from? Like that kind of silence factor?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think we don't have the tools to talk about it in honest ways. You think about most of our framework, those of us who, grew up in the US at least, our framework for sex is either don't talk about it, which may have come from our families, religion, media, our schools, like we don't talk about it, or if it is discussed, it's in a very jokey way. So, it's on the commercials, selling a light bulb, selling a car, and it's gag gifts. And, the whole thing is very jokey. And so we don't really have a framework for talking about it in any way that's honest. And so with a lack of tools comes shame and confusion, and it's easier just to not talk about it at all. And then there's also the inbred, specifically directed shame, where many folks I've talked to over the years tell me stories of explicitly being shamed for talking about or being sexual in any way as young children. And one that's jumping out at me right now was a woman who shared that when she went out on like her first date, like she's in high school, and her mother gave her a nickel to put between her knees. And she says, when you get home, there better be an impression of this nickel on your knees, basically like you keep your legs closed, right? Wow, right? So we have these messages, and then we grow up and we have our sexual experiences and our culture moves forward. And so intellectually, we're like, yeah, there's nothing wrong with this. We should talk about it. It's normal. But we have this gut feeling of like, no, this is not okay. And so a lot of people are at odds with each other. And that's a lot of the work that I do when I work with individuals and doing sex coaching is like, how do we undo that piece so that you can move forward and live a happy sexual life without that hanging over you?
Well, and I imagine a lot of it comes down to also like some level of insecurity, because there has been this shame around it. The only sex education we get is like, these are what your anatomical parts are. And like, you're probably going to get pregnant if you expose them. Mm-hmm. So it's like we then aren't kind of taught how to navigate in a healthy way, like a sexual relationship with ourselves, let alone somebody else. And then it's this super sensitive and vulnerable and intimate subject. So it's like, if you start asking questions or wanting to talk about it, that's almost admitting that you don't know what you're doing, which then has this other weird shame to it. Cause it's kind of like, we're not supposed to be talking about sex, yet we're all supposed to just be great at it. which doesn't really make sense either.
No, you're right. It doesn't make sense. An analogy I use sometimes is like saying, like, imagine your entire life, you never even were told about the concept of a numeral, and then you graduate, you're 18 years old, and you got to do quantum, physics. And it just doesn't make sense, where there's not the incremental preparation in the ways that there are for literally everything else that we need to do competently as adults.
Yes. Yeah, that's a great analogy. I also I wonder, what are the gender differences in this experience of kind of shame and stigmas? Because so I obviously only know the female experience, but I kind of get the feeling that almost men have it easier. Like, it's the woman who went on the date when she was younger with the nickel in between her legs. Like, whoever she went on a date on, I guarantee he didn't get the same, lecture from his parents. So it's kind of like it's been okay for men to be sexual, but then on the flip side, maybe that creates a whole other level of pressure of they're really expected to know what to do, yet they're not getting any education either. They're just getting a bunch of attaboys.
Yeah, you bring up a great point, because I tend to think, also coming from the female perspective, that it feels harder for me. I feel like, with the slut shaming and the pregnancy shaming and the birth control shaming and all that stuff, body shaming, it feels harder. I feel like men have their own shames and things that they were brought up with. So because they don't have that same type, they have a different type of this toxic masculinity, where it's like, be a man, don't cry. You have to pursue women. If you're gay or bisexual, forget it, as far as anything other than 5 years ago, where it started to be completely horrible being in school for most kids. And there's still a lot of pressure to perform sexually and conquer sexually. And even just today, I don't know if you're familiar with Post Secret.
Yes. Yeah, I follow them.
Yeah, me too. So the one they posted today was a secret that someone said something to the effect of I've spent my entire life being obsessed and miserable about that my penis is too small, or something like that. So yeah, I think that there's a fair amount of shame and struggle to go around.
So then how is that all playing out and kind of hurting us in our relationships?
I think if we're introspective and can put ourselves in a position of being honest about our relationships, I think we'll find that there's a lot of pain that comes from this stuff. So certainly, for instance, I've dealt with clients who, not specifically the penis size example, but the performing or the erectile, not dysfunction because it's not a medical thing, but just they lose the erection, and then it just spirals them into this crisis of their sense of self and their masculinity, and their, it just really hurts. There's a lot of harm and hurt, and for women especially, about the way that they were taught to feel about their bodies and the way they were taught to engage with partners, especially if they have male partners. They feel a lot of inadequacy. The faking orgasm, the whole faking orgasm thing comes out of a sense of pain, of feeling like something's missing, I can't communicate, or I'm not enjoying myself, or I don't know how to tell you what I want, or, whatever it is. So I think it shows up in hundreds of different little nuanced ways that we might not necessarily see on the surface, but you start to peel back the layers and you see this is all about shame. However the problem or issue might be showing up, you can really distill it down to this is about shame.
Yeah, so the faking orgasm thing, that's interesting, because that makes zero sense when you really think about it, why we would do it. And I've done it. And I remember my reasons for doing it was feeling like there's something wrong with me, or I'm going to disappoint him or cause this to be a negative experience if I don't finish. So then you fake it. But that doesn't, a man wouldn't do, I assume a man wouldn't do that. I don't know. Again, I only know my own experience, but that logic right there, doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, on face value, if we consider an orgasm a pleasant thing, we might seek to have to stop a sexual experience without having it and pretend we did. Makes absolutely no sense. But then you start looking at the shame stuff and you start to be like, aha, so we have these messages that women are not really sexual agents. They're kind of sexual devices that are there to pleasure other people. And so now we have, even just if you look at our language, like the fact that we continue to call the vulva vagina in popular vernacular because we think of female sexuality as something that other people do, versus like a vulva is an agent of sexuality, and vaginas are more like receptacles of sexuality, if you will. And so the fact that we just think of the entire genital area as the thing you put something in, it really starts to, again, show the shame of like, wow, like we're very twisted as a society. And yeah, so if you think my sexuality isn't for me, I'm here to please, I'm not being pleased, so it doesn't matter if, and I don't necessarily think that this exact verbiage goes through most people's minds, but that's the underlying feeling.
Yes. Okay. So how do we start to, first of all, notice and become aware of that underlying theme, if that is present within our sex lives, our relationships, our dating life, whatever it may be, because, awareness, like we've got to be aware of something before we can change it. And then how do we start to reverse some of that messaging?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I try to help people look for the shoulds and the supposed tos, which are the two bad S words when it comes to sexuality, dating, and relationships, because most times, and I'm hard pressed to think of an example otherwise, it's not true. So whatever we think we should do and we're supposed to do, I ask people, once you get that feeling, when you start noticing, oh, I really should do this, or if I don't do this, then they're going to do that, so I should, all that kind of thinking, I'm like, okay, pause. Who told you that? Is it true? What evidence do you have that it's true? What evidence do you have that it's not true? How would your life be different if you didn't think that's true? And start to plot a life for yourself going forward. And again, this is the one-on-one coaching work I do, but you can still do it on your own to some extent and thinking about that. So for instance, with the faking orgasm, if you're thinking, oh, I really, it's really not that important, or, I should make sure he finishes first. Is that true? Who told you that? So starting to unpack that, and you start to be like, you know what? No, actually the truth is my sexuality is valid and important too, and I deserve to have a good time. And, so you can start to change dynamics. Or finding a vibrator. That's a big one. But if I get a vibrator, then it's going to replace a partner, or this must mean I'm like a sexual freak and I can't get enough, or, all these types of things. Is that true? Who said? Who taught you that? How much do they know about the subject? And kind of building a case for yourself, like a court case almost, and starting to realize, yeah, you don't have one most of the time. Yeah. There's no argument. Yeah. No,
I love that, because you're right. And if you think back to just even, this messaging we've gotten is everywhere, down to like, sitcoms we grew up watching and stuff. And so there's almost like this, it's normal for a woman to not necessarily enjoy sex and not want to do it. And whereas the man is usually always the initiator and, trying to convince the wife in the sitcom to have sex. And she's like, no, I don't want to. And she's like, when is this over with? And, there's always jokes complaining about like lack of foreplay and stuff. So it's like, we've kind of come up thinking that it is acceptable that sex isn't this very enjoyable, satisfying experience with ourselves. And then anything we do to try and change that makes us all of a sudden like a sex freak.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Among many other tropes of sitcom and sex, it's the old ball and chain and she's got a headache and yes. Yeah. Very tired. But this is the messaging we all have.
So kind of starting to rewrite the narrative you have going through your mind about your sexuality. Does it start with like your sexual relationship with yourself and exploring yourself and masturbation and removing any shame you have around that, so that like you figure out and become comfortable with your own body?
I do think that you can't go wrong with using masturbation first. Anytime you're trying to learn a sex technique, it's always easier to learn it on yourself first and then being able to relay that to a partner, for sure. I think on a big bigger scale, even kind of almost the first step is even thinking about what sexuality even is. And this gets very existential, because we tend to still, again, think of it as genitals and an action and a behavior and something that we do. Sex is what we do. And I think of it as sex is what we are. It's a part of who we are. And I have a cool activity that I like to do when I do workshops that shows 7 different domains of sexuality. And it's, yes, the sex acts and the body parts and all that stuff is just one of them. And the other things are our emotions, intimacy, our cultural lens, our health, our the power dynamics, the gender, the orientation, all of these things and more coming together. It's really how we walk through life. And so I really try to have people unpack even deeper than with them, a sex act with themselves versus with another person, is who are you as a sexual being? Are there any other myths and lies you're carrying around about it that is worth unpacking, and kind of starting from there and then going through and doing those kinds of challenging exercises.
Okay. I love that in theory, but can you explain that a little bit further? So, because I love the concept of all right, sexuality, it's more than just an act, because we do tend to think of sex is something that we do, and it consists of, this list of activities. So explain more about how sexuality can live within these other aspects of life. And I'm happy to use me as an example if that makes it easier.
Yeah. So one of them, I just pulled it out as a reference. So one of them circles is intimacy, and things in this circle include things like the idea of liking and loving and taking emotional risks and being vulnerable. And, and so one of the activities I have people think of examples, and we have a whole wall in the classroom that's full of all these pieces of paper. And so things like taking care of someone when they're sick, or texting someone and asking how that job interview went. This is a part of sexuality, if you can believe it. And then things like sensuality is another whole domain. So this is things like visual stimuli and our brains and how they fantasize skin hunger, this desire to touch and be touched. Then we have things like obviously our sexual identity. So what our gender roles are, or how we show up in relationships with our identities. This could be, some examples people have used the idea of bathrooms being segregated by this definition. And what does that mean? And how does that show up for us? And, it could go, the technology and pop culture and, histories of objectification and abuse sexually and how that all shows up. So it becomes, when you start to zoom out, you start to realize that sexuality is really big and touches on so many aspects of our lives and our humanity. And so doing things like, do I feel I can be vulnerable with myself, that I can look at myself naked, for instance, and how that feels and what messages come up for me when I do that, and who told me those? Are they reputable? Is it true? And so doing that kind of work beyond just masturbation or sex acts with another. Does that make sense?
It does. No, it does. It's just okay. So I get it and I love it, but then there's something in my brain being there's nothing sexual about taking care of a friend. But is that just my limited definitions of what sexual means? So you're saying sexuality is kind of just a much bigger umbrella over the essence of who we are.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And this is kind of, the argument that sex educators often make about how we like sex education to start young, and then people's minds explode because they think that we want to, talk to kindergartners about, anal sex or something, and that's totally inappropriate because there's other aspects of sexuality. So something like consent and how you ask your friends in school before you give them a hug, and if they say no, that's okay, and you can give a high five instead, that's sex education, because our bodily autonomy is a part of our sexuality, and being emotionally vulnerable is a part of our sexuality too. And so learning how to keep your friends' confidence and sharing secrets and all that stuff, yeah, I would say is a part of sex education. It's just a different framework that's more inclusive of what it means to be sexual.
Okay. All right. So I just had a little bit of an aha moment. So then is it fair to say that how we show up during the act of sex, like in the bedroom with another person, is that like reflective of how our sexuality is playing out in all these other aspects in terms of, can we be vulnerable with ourselves? Can we be vulnerable with others? Like, are we respectful and aware of what's going on with somebody else, or are we solely focused on like what's going on with us? Like, how open-minded are we? Can we kind of look at ourselves or what's happening in the bedroom and find kind of bigger themes going on in our life?
I'm sitting here and I'm nodding. You can't see me. I'm sitting here nodding like, yes, exactly. Yes. Beautifully said. Yeah. So I'll have to send you a picture of this diagram that I'm referring to. So maybe you can show your listeners as well. So it'll make a little bit more sense. But you show up with genitals to an experience, and that's an experience, but it's not happening in a vacuum. All parties are coming with the messages and their beliefs and their experiences about sensuality, intimacy, power, their histories with violation, their identities, their reproductive stuff, and then the cultural lens, the laws, the polity, their religion, their traditions, their media consumption. All of this is coming together in that space. And so that's why I think, looking at it broadly is important, because people look and be like, penis doesn't get erect or orgasm doesn't happen. What's wrong? And they often want a technique, which there are some, we talked about that in the blowjob article, and toys are great because they're a way to kind of solve a situation in that moment. But then also it's like, let's look at the bigger picture, and being willing to do that work and be like, oh, when I was a kid, my mother told me not to let the nickel drop. So maybe that might have something to do with how I'm showing up here.
I love that. That I didn't get it at first, but now I totally get it, that all these other aspects of life and how we interact with the world, people in it, and ourselves, like that's all going to come with us into the bedroom.
Yes. So, for instance, when things happen like the school dress codes was a big news story for a while, and girls getting sent home because what they were wearing, because if you're going to distract the boys, and the boys are being taught, it's girls' responsibility to hide themselves so I'm not distracted, and the girls are wearing tank tops getting sent home from school and things like this, that's going to show up.
Yep.
That is going to show up.
Because that's this message that they're not responsible for their own reaction, like we are.
And it can go positively too, and that's how we move forward as a society. So the fact that you're talking about this right now and people are going to tune in to listen, that's going to impact them too. Right. So it's, that's going to be part of their narrative. So it's all about just trying to put more positive and authentic and scientifically based stuff in there to balance out all these other messages that people are getting.
Okay. I want to talk about a couple sex related things and just get your perspective on them. So, sure. All right. So like sex toys, I feel like they get a total bad rap, and a lot of people's experience with them is that they exist in some kind of a store that has all this crazy stuff, and or maybe it is seen as like, if you want to bring, say, a vibrator into your relationship, is that going to be like a threat to your partner because he thinks like I'm not enough? Like, why are people so hesitant to go the sex toy route?
Well, I think that's changing a lot because, I mean, not in the coronavirus situation aside, which they are going up, but even in general, like the last few years, more and more people are buying them and using them, according to the research and also the sales records. I think it is changing, but for the folks who are still kind of having those feelings you describe, I think that comes from the shame again and the narrative that there's a way of doing this, and you want to follow the way of doing it. And that doesn't fit that old narrative that sex is penis and vagina, right? And we know that that's a pretty heteronormative way of looking at things, but we still as a society are really obsessed with this model. And so things like dry humping and oral sex and using toys or anything else that, just having a really deep makeout session and then going to read your book and falling asleep, or nipple play. I mean, the list goes on and on of sex acts that can be sex. If it doesn't fit that narrative of of the very specific way things unfold, then people don't know what to do with it. They really don't know how it's going to work. They have some anxiety about it. They're afraid of rejection or ridicule from their partner if their partner's not down for it. So it can feel easier just to be like, no, that's not for me, without having tried it. And I understand that, and I'm empathetic to that, trying to, like all the things, just kind of blow the top off of the stigma and be like, you might enjoy it. And a lot of people do.
Right. Yeah. Does that very strict definition of what sex is a lot of that rooted in like religious context of kind of the only reason to have sex is to procreate? Like, I remember learning that growing up in my Catholic school education and immediately being like, huh? Like, that didn't make sense to me then. It certainly doesn't make sense to me now, but I imagine that's maybe a widespread belief, or it was, and then that messaging was instilled in so many of us that we have that just very limited definition of what sex is and what sex should be.
Yeah. I think religion plays a big part, and just the larger picture of the more conservative worldview that sex really shouldn't, the Puritan worldview, if you will, that sex is not supposed to be fun because fun is frivolous. That's kind of the worldview. Any type of fun, right? I think about like when Pokemon Go was really popular, and then you had everybody loving it, and then 2 days later you had everybody else being like, oh my gosh, it's so annoying, stop posting. Like, we really just don't like other people having fun as a society, and that's a big part of it. Like, if it's for procreation, then we can, like, fine, we can deal. But if it's just because we like it, then we start to get off the track with, our Judeo-Christian Puritan values.
Yeah. Okay. What about porn? Because I've heard mixed things on porn. So on one aspect, I've heard, and I can buy into the fact that it is good and can be fun for like a couple to watch together if that's what they're into and turn them on. And I'm not anti-porn of somebody watching it by themselves. I've certainly seen my fair share, but I heard recently that kind of the negative part of it could be, all right, so you're watching this very physical sexual act and you're getting turned on, but you're not experiencing the human touch to go along with it, which then can start to kind of disassociate like the importance of human touch when it comes to like sex related acts. Like, what are your views on porn?
Yeah. I think the thing with porn is that, unlike any other topic that I can honestly think of, there's a lot of there's like this field of people who are putting out very scientific-y sounding quote unquote research or websites, organizations purporting certain outcomes that really doesn't hold up empirically. The thing about porn that gets people into trouble, and the only thing that I really can think of that gets people into trouble with porn, is then they look at it as education instead of entertainment, because it is entertainment. And the analogy I try to explain with folks is like, you watch a rom-com, right? And it's entertaining. It makes you feel a certain way that you like, and you don't stand outside of someone's window with a stereo and you don't chase them down in the airport, because that's not how you actually behave, right? Like, we read sci-fi novels. I'm not building spaceships in my backyard. You can watch porn and you can be like, I enjoy watching this. This makes me feel a certain way. I'm not going to get life lessons from it. And I think that's where people get lost, is in lieu of any sex education. We talked about how abysmal it is, and any other good resources. People watch porn and they start to take tips from it. They start to think that this is indicative of anything other than a fantasy. And so then they go to an actual partner and try to do this, or have expectations that are going to be not good and not helpful.
I love that analogy, because you're so right. Like, in terms of the rom-coms, it's like, it's entertaining and it's all like, oh yeah, like, wouldn't it be great, like, if life were like that? But like, we've all learned, like, that's not how relationships are. That's not real life. And if you try and go out and make life like that, like, it's not going to work out well for you. So that's a great analogy. Okay. All right. One other thing I'm really curious about your thoughts on, since you are just highly educated in all of this, but the kind of older generations, for the most part, we've grown up with this more monogamous sense of a relationship, and specifically a sexual relationship. But now there's this increase in open relationships and just a lot more blurred lines in terms of, I guess, what people would consider like fidelity or infidelity. Do you think that kind of exploration for couples is healthy? Is it dangerous? Are we trying to force ourselves into unrealistic situations, or is there some truth to the people who think that, on a basic animal level, like, we aren't meant to be monogamous?
It's a great question. I think whenever there's like an increase of some type of sexual behavior, my question or my thought is always like, is it really increasing, or are people just more comfortable to talk about it now? Like the last few years, it's been like people with asses, right? Like butt play and big butts and all this type of, it's the year of the butt. And I'm like, people have always been into butts. Like people have been licking butts since the beginning of time. This is not new. And I feel like it's the same thing like that. People have had all kinds of relationship dynamics forever. Sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. And that's also been true forever. I think it's true that there's more acceptance of it. There's more language that people use to describe it, which helps other people understand it better. More high-profile people have these types of relationships, so it's becoming more seen. But I don't really know, actually, but I don't know if it has really increased. But as far as whether it's a good idea or not, I think it's like so many things where some people are going to love it. Some people, it's going to flop majorly. If it's something that interests you, my suggestion is to have obviously the honesty and the openness has to be really, really strong foundation. You can't build on something that's already weak. So making sure that all cards are on the table and everybody's honest and their feelings are being heard and validated, and it's a joint decision. That's the only way it could even possibly work. So I think that's a really important thing.
Right. Well, that kind of ties back to what we were talking about earlier about kind of what you have going on in all aspects of life is going to show up in the bedroom. Mm-hmm. So if you don't have that level of security, vulnerability, honest, like solid foundation within your relationship in all aspects of life, and then you try and bring someone else into the bedroom like that, into the mix, that could be a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, compound the mess. Yeah. And for some people, it's just not for them. So even they say, like, I'm very okay feeling vulnerable and honest, and my honesty is, it's not for me, and I don't want to. And, that can also be a conversation. So it's very much up to, I think, the individuals involved to see what's good for them.
Okay. All right. I want to close out with one final question, because I'm big on like first steps, because I think a lot of times when people realize something they've got going on and then it's like, oh my God, like how am I going to, tackle this within my life? It can be overwhelming. Whereas you just kind of take that next step, because that's all like we can ever do. So for somebody who has maybe recognized they have a level of shame when it comes to their sexuality, or shame is certainly showing up for them if they're in a relationship, then in the bedroom, or, if they're not, then in the dating life, like what is kind of the first thing you recommend them to start doing to overcome that?
There's a few things, but I think the one I want to address is this idea of paying it forward. I think it's really powerful. So if you have shame and it comes inward, a lot of times what we do is then we push it right back out. And maybe we can't yet stop it for ourselves, but we might be able to stop doing it to others. So for instance, if you don't like how you feel or look, or you have certain feelings of shame about dressing in stiletto heels and a small dress, okay. But maybe check your feelings about when you see other women doing it, and you might have this feeling of like, wow, like a slut shaming comment or a thought, or like, who does she think she is, or what is she out wearing, something like that, or like that type of thoughts. Try and notice that and refrain. Or if you have a body shaming comment, try to refrain. Or if so in judging the others, because that starts to then teach you how to not judge, it's going to make you feel really good. You're putting much more positivity out in the world to not do that for others. And it starts to trickle inward.
I absolutely love that. Yes, pay it forward. Okay, tell everybody where they can find you and follow you and learn more about the work that you do.
Yeah, so my coaching and education work is at thesexologist.org, and my Instagram is sex.jill. And then I also do a lot of education work for CalExotics.com/Dr. Jill, and their Instagram is CalExotics.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. I love this conversation. I'm happy to be able to talk about it and hopefully increase the number of people who are thinking about it, talking about it, and addressing all of it. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. It was so nice chatting with you.
Okay, so that is it for the first portion of this show. And then now we're going to move into a conversation with Lupe, who is actually an employee at CalExotics. And she just shares her experience and insight on how she got her husband on board with trying some sex toys and how it changed their sex life, and then how to approach sex toys if you are completely new to them, either personally or as a couple. So I'm so appreciative of her candidness and willing to share, because I think a lot of times, when we hear these conversations with the experts, it's like, oh yeah, okay, awesome. I'm going to, try and explore more. That's something, I would like to do. But then when you think specifically about your situation, especially if you have a partner who maybe isn't as open-minded, or you have no idea how they feel and you're afraid they're not going to be open-minded, it helps to hear someone else's real life story of kind of how it went for them and their insight and advice. So thank you again, Lupe, for being open and willing to share your experience. Also, if you are interested in trying a sex toy, then please reach out to me directly. So CalExotics has been kind enough to send me some, and honestly, I have more than I need. And I'd love to be able to share them with some listeners. So you don't have to do anything to get one other than reach out to me, and I can kind of let you know what I still have in my inventory, and you can pick which one that you want, which could be a great non-intrusive way to bring one into your household as kind of like, oh, I won this in a podcast giveaway. Not that you necessarily went out and bought one if you think your partner will be threatened or not on board with that. So if you want to try one, reach out to me. I will give them away on a first come, first serve basis, and it can just be totally private between you and me. I will ship it to you, no problem. So that is it. Let's go ahead and hear from Lupe. Okay, so Lupe, welcome. I'm so excited to talk to you because I love talking to and getting kind of the expert points of view in terms of our sex lives and our sexuality. And it's one thing to listen to all this and be like, yeah, that sounds great. I'm gonna do that, and I'm gonna kind of spice up my sex life, and I'm gonna bring toys or lingerie or porn or whatever into my relationship. But it's another thing to actually tackle all of that in real life and navigate all that with another person. So I'm very happy that you're here and willing to share your story.
Well, thank you for having me.
Okay, so let's talk about kind of where you were and what your life looked like, I guess, before some of this sexual exploration and openness. So, and before you started working for a sex toy company, which we will talk about as well. But what was your job? How would you describe your overall personality and then also your sex life?
Well, when I graduated college, my first job was I worked for a marketing research company. And it's the Nielsen television ratings. And so how they measure the ratings is they have, at that time, I don't know now, but they have 5,000 households throughout the U.S. And so my job was to recruit Nielsen families in Southern California to be part of our sample. And, it's difficult because you're coming into people's homes. You're going to a very diverse area. And it was interesting. And I did that for 3 years. Then I got married and I left that job. And I felt like one of my weaknesses was really in talking to people over the phone. So I thought, well, I need to work on that. Hey, I'll go to the phone company and I'll do that for a while and be comfortable with talking to strangers on the phone and, obviously servicing their needs. And at the same time, I would sell them on bundles. And, when I started at Pacific Bell, which is now AT&T, caller ID kind of was the big thing. So it was talking to people about caller ID. And so while I was at Pacific Bell, I'd go to the gym and I had a personal trainer and I would see Eric in the mornings. And so one day I just, was like, oh, you know what? I'll go do some cardio after work. So I did. And I saw this beautiful car in the parking lot. And the next time that I saw him, I said, you know what, Eric, I came in and I did some cardio, blah, blah, blah. And I saw this car, who is it? And who comes to the gym? And I thought, Snoop Dogg's wife also would go, Snoop Dogg's wife would also go to the gym. So I was like, is that Snoop's wife's car? He starts giggling. He says, no, it's this lady and she owns this company. And I didn't think twice about it. I just kept going on. But, a couple months passed and he said, remember the lady with the car? And I said, yes. Well, she's looking for somebody. And I think that you would be a perfect fit. So I was like, okay. I was a little offended. I have to be really honest because okay. So I was married at the time. And so I talked to my husband about it and he said, Loops, you have a job. What do you have to lose? Just go check it out. So I called her.
So you knew at this point in time that it was CalExotics, right? Like he told you what it was and you were familiar with that company?
I was not familiar with CalExotics. No, prior to working at CalExotics, I was not a consumer of the product and I had never walked into a adult store.
Gotcha. Okay.
So I was completely new to all of it. And I can tell you, 18 years later, my life has been enriched being at CalExotics. So my husband said, just go check it out. So I called Susan. She is the owner of CalExotics, Susan Colvin. And we did the phone interview. Then she's like, okay, come on in. So I went in and she gave me a tour of our warehouse. I got to meet everybody in the office. And then she took me up to the showroom. And it was my first time seeing products actually in front of me. And I'm sure that I turned all shades of red. And, I inside of me, I was giggly. And, and she saw something in me and she offered me the job. And here I am.
Okay, so that moment when you walk into the showroom and you're just looking at all these sex toys that you had never seen before, tell us a little bit about kind of like what you were bringing into that room with you. Like what was your, prior to that moment and working for CalExotics, what was your overall attitude towards sex? What was your sex life like? Like, were you very adventuresome or were you a little bit more conservative? Did you kind of have a little bit maybe of a judgy attitude towards like the adult toy industry, or what were your views on it prior to working for the company?
Well, I thought that I was adventurous. Yeah, I had been with my husband for several years, and I thought that our sex life was good. And, when I walked into our showroom, I thought, you know what? I'm missing out. I need to bring some, some just enhance my sex life with my partner. And why not? This is okay. It was something that obviously when you think of, when you drive past an adult store, you think it's going to be sleazy, whatever our misconceptions are, there are misconceptions. When you walk in, for the most part, you have a very positive experience, and it can be overwhelming because there are so many different options, and it's just kind of navigating and figuring out what is pleasurable to you.
Right. So, and I love this because, you're seeing like, it's a legit business. It's a legit company. It's a female owned and founded company. So that right there, I'm sure helped remove some stigmas, but you sound like you were immediately open-minded to bringing some new toys into the bedroom. How did your husband view the industry and that idea?
Well, I was like, this is going to be a lot of fun. I'm really excited, and it's healthy. However, my husband was like, there's no way that we're going to be using these. Nope, we are good. No need to bring anything. We take care of each other, and our sex life is good. And so I thought, okay, how am I going to approach this? And so I started bringing samples to the house because I needed to be able to do effective presentations, learn the functionality, selling features. So when I'm doing my presentations, I know what I'm talking about, and people can respect me because I'm knowledgeable in the product. So I started just bringing stuff home little by little. And I remember it was a Saturday, and I, put batteries in, and I'm, turning the products on. And so my husband's like, I think let's try it. So I was like, all right. So I did it. We immediately, tried a product, and it was so much fun. And he really, and he liked it. He was after that, he was very open to trying different things. And it just kind of took our intimacy and our sexual life just to a whole nother level.
Okay. So I love this. I love that. Cause like it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, you didn't push it on him and really kind of try and force him into it, or really even have much conversation about it at all, but you kind of just brought them into the house and had them out, which kind of naturally sparked his curiosity.
Yes, because it's when you approach the topic of bringing toys into the relationship, you don't want it to be like, you don't want to keep pushing it, because then they feel that maybe they're not adequate in the bedroom. Or so for me, my approach is just bringing stuff home and, just learning the product and turning it on for him and showing him like, oh my gosh, look, this is one of our new dual stimulators. This is one of our new couple enhancement rings, and then him feeling comfortable with that and realizing that it's not replacing him. It's just bringing us closer together and just enhancing our sexual life. And after that, he was very, very open. And I'm glad, because I thought, gosh, this is going to be this is going to suck if here I am in a relationship working for the largest sex toy manufacturer of the world, and I can't even experiment with these products. And so he came around pretty quickly. So that was great.
Yeah. Well, you could experiment with them just alone and not as a couple, which I think is, I don't know, I wonder how much of a misconception that is, both in the minds of women and in the minds of men, is that, these toys are really just to be used alone, versus thinking about how fun they could be and how much they could enhance a relationship.
Obviously you can use them, and you should use them by yourself, because it allows you to explore your body, get comfortable with your body, and, find out what really excites you and what are those little exciting points that you can tell your husband, like, or your partner, you can say, honey, how about if we do it this way? This is going to kind of get me to get to the point of to climax or to have an orgasm. So I completely encourage women to, buy products for themselves and also to incorporate them with their partner.
Did you and your husband ever have a conversation then later about how he kind of changed his mind about it? Or did you just leave it untalked about, like didn't want to kind of call any attention to it and maybe like mess it up?
No, we did. We talked about it, and he said, I was so narrow-minded, and I see what it's done for us, and I see what it's done for you. And he's like, you know what? It's made my job easier in the bedroom because here we've got, something so discreet or a little bullet or what have you that is allowing you to really, truly have an orgasm. So, yeah. Yeah, we did. We it actually, it enhanced our communication. It brought us closer together.
Yes, I love that because I think a lot of times couples have a hard time talking about sex and their sex life. And I think because usually it's almost approached from this is what I'm not getting that I want type of thing, or people are afraid that's the tone of the conversation, instead of looking at it from like, all right, this was really great. I really loved when you did this, all positive. And then you bring in another element, say like a toy, that enhances the experience. And so that gives you just a positive to talk about, which then opens the doors of conversation.
Exactly. Because you know what, when you talk about bringing a sex toy in, or that you want to experiment with a product, you have to approach it in a really lighthearted, fun way so that your partner doesn't feel like, well, you know what, are you not happy with what I'm doing? Are you not satisfied? And it's really, just about enhancing what you already have.
Yes.
It doesn't replace, it doesn't any of that. It's just enhancing, and it's bringing you closer together, and it's lighthearted. It doesn't have to be, since I've been at CalExotics for 18 years, and toys have evolved, and there's so many items that are very discreet that nobody would know that it is a pleasure product. And so it's just really approaching it in a really lighthearted way. And they will reciprocate, and they will, initially they might object or they might be hesitant, but once they see how it pleasures you and how easy it is, they will welcome it.
And I think this is, another kind of misconception is that the toys are just there to pleasure the female. But I mean, that is not true, because a lot of these toys can be used during sex. And so then that vibrating component, like if a man has never experienced that vibrating component for themselves, like that's missing out to some degree. So I think a lot of times we think, oh, well, this is just for the woman, but really, like you can bring especially that vibrating component so that both people are feeling it and benefiting from it.
Yeah, the vibrating component is so much fun. And, when people think of vibrators, you kind of think of a dual stimulator jackrabbit, as, you saw in Sex and the City.
Mm-hmm.
But there are so many different types. You have couple enhancement rings. You also have masturbators for men. So it's kind of a great way, ladies. Like, it helps with, let's say you're giving your husband a hand job, or you're doing oral sex on your partner. A masturbation sleeve, you put it, you slide the penis inside of it. It's textured, so as you're doing oral on your partner, you can also use that sleeve, and it really kind of takes it up to a whole nother level with your partner, because they're inside of these masturbation sleeves, like there's texture, so it's a different type of sensation for him. You can also add a little bullet, so it's not just about us, but it's just kind of bringing all of us together in terms of the dynamic in the usage of the toy. It doesn't just have to be all just about you. So there are we manufacture 2,200 items. So we have something for everyone. And
that in itself, like, that is mind blowing. 2,200 different types of items. Like, if that doesn't spark someone's curiosity, like, I don't know what would.
Yeah. We approach vibrators at CalExotics. We approach vibrators like shoes. Just think about it. You can't just have a pair of black shoes. So you need to have your flats. You need to have like a kitten heel or a stiletto and everything in between. So it's the same thing with vibrators. And we find that on average, women own about 8 products, eight different types of toys for themselves. So it's a lot of fun. We introduce newness every 6 months, and we are in the forefront in terms of the manufacturers that are out there. We lead the way. We've paved the way for a lot of others as well, and it's so much fun.
So you had the advantage of working for the company, which gave you a reason to bring toys into the house to help spark the curiosity of your husband. The majority of women don't have that kind of excuse, I guess, to have them. So kind of to your point of like, you don't want to, if your partner is maybe a little bit more closed-minded to the idea, you need to approach it gently so that they don't get defensive. Right. So how do you recommend women go about that? Like, do they buy one for themselves and tell their partner? Do they buy one and kind of just leave it out? Or like, if you don't have the excuse, say that you had to have them present so that your partner gets curious, what's the best way to introduce it into the household?
Well, you know what? It really just kind of depends on the person and the dynamic of that relationship. There are some women that will just kind of go in and buy something and, just talk to their partner like, I think we should try this, or they buy it for themselves They don't tell their partner, but I feel like they're cheating their partner and seeing really what it is that excites you, what turns you on. And one of my friends, the best way that she kind of described bringing in sex toys was that she said, you know what, you can't, if you like pizza, you can't have pepperoni pizza for the rest of your life. There's days that you're going to be in the mood to add maybe some mushrooms or what have you. And it's the same thing. It's just enhancing your relationship. It's not replacing it. And, it just kind of maybe even just brings stuff in. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a toy. And you can start off with a really nice massage oil, flavored lubricant. It could be our spicy dice, just a nice little dice game. We also have card games that, they're non-threatening, but it allows you to really, truly get to know your partner. And, communication is key, but really that is one thing that we probably all lack, is really being open with each other and honest about our fantasies, what excites us, what turns us on, what we would like. And so a couples card game like our Pillow Talk game is perfect because it asks questions and it allows you to be honest with your partner and really kind of just get to know each other a little bit better. So don't always just think it has to be a vibrator. It's all these other little things, a nice little lingerie. It kind of paves the way into you bringing a sex toy home.
That's a really good point, that like it's kind of a spectrum maybe of where you as an individual and then your relationship is in terms of openness and honesty and curiosity in exploring, different sexual experiences. So if you or your partner is a little bit more on the intrepid, intimidated, closed-minded, whatever the reason be, that you're not necessarily exploring those areas, then yeah, maybe jumping right to a toy might be a little bit too much, because to your point, you do probably need to get more in touch with and start more open dialogue about what is it that you've fantasized about. And then, if you've if you've got shame or reasons that you're not even exploring that or allowing yourself to think about that, then that's maybe some work you need to do. So it can kind of help show areas of growth that are needed, like within yourself and your relationship, as in terms of like honesty and openness and vulnerability and all of that stuff that we all kind of struggle with within ourselves as well as with other people.
Right.
All right. So as far as actual toys, though, so I love your advice on starting with maybe the pillow talk game or dice or a massage oil or something like that. Once you get into the actual toys, what would you recommend for beginners? Because I'm by no means a beginner when it comes to toys, but some of the jackrabbit and that kind of stuff, like that's even intimidating to me a little bit. So like, what would you recommend for people who are ready to bring a toy into either their own individual lives or their relationship? Like what is best for beginners?
Well, it truly depends on what it is that you want. You have bullets are always very, very common because they're small, they're very discreet. Again, they're non-intimidating. We came out with a new line called Hidden Pleasures. And the item is it looks like a stylus or a vape pen. It's so discreet. No one would know that it's a toy because it just looks like I said, like a stylus or a vape pen, and it's not intimidating, but yet very effective. It's rechargeable. There's 10 different functions. The vibration is perfect. It's for those that are kind of new to toys, but usually, a lot of products are very powerful that, can be a little intimidating for some people. So that to me is a great starting point. We also have, if you want a dual stimulator, our Butterfly Kiss is our number one selling dual stim. It has a little butterfly on the end so that when you insert it, the butterfly covers the clitoral area, the external part. And so you're getting vibration both internally and externally. And, 25% of women actually achieve an orgasm from penetration alone. I think that number is actually higher. I think that probably less than 25% of women truly achieve an orgasm from penetration alone. So something like a butterfly kiss would be perfect because you kind of get to explore your body. And men are visual, so they would love to see their partner climax without them, and it's a really great product. It's non-intimidating. We have your basic butterfly kiss that is 3 speeds, and we have silicone butterfly kiss. And just recently we introduced a rechargeable butterfly kiss, which is awesome because you never have to worry about your batteries dying out on you. And the vibrations are perfect. In addition, you have couple enhancement rings that you can use together. So how a couple enhancement ring works is that you put it on the shaft of the penis, and usually there's a part that kind of, when you're on top of him, it hits your sweet spot. So it hits your clitoris, and it allows both of you to climax together. The first product that my husband and I used was the Dive & Dolphin, which is a staple at CalExotics, and it has two areas for bullets. So we used both bullets, and we cranked it up to the highest speeds. And obviously it was very short-lived. and we learned to figure out what works best for us. And then you eventually you get to the point where you want more power, where you want something stronger. But it was great. And so there are a lot of different options. We have many, many, many different options for you to try and explore. And that is what makes it fun. You can also use something like, even when you are having intercourse with your partner, there's nipple clamps that you can use on yourself if you're into nipple stimulation. You can use something externally. We have our new French kiss line. It's 3 different items where it has a flickering tongue. And these are really like a small little product, but it is rechargeable, super cute. And the tongue and the product actually moves. So you can use that flickering tongue, let's say on your nipples. You can use it externally, or you can even use it on your partner. So, we design products that are multifunctional, and we design products that are good quality products, and you're going to have a really great time with them. And you both will enjoy using the products together or individually.
Agree 100%. And I will say that I have the French kiss and highly recommend it as a solo act or with your partner. Yes. That's a lot of fun. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and being so just honest and open, because I don't know how much this is really talked about. And I know that a lot of women, maybe men too, I don't know, but think about it, maybe fantasize about it, question it, and are maybe reluctant or afraid to broach it with their partner for whatever reason. So I think that you just being so honest in your experience and how you overcame that is super helpful. So thank you so much. Tell everybody where they can find more information about the company and all the products that you guys make.
Well, you can go to CalExotics.com. And you can see all the different products that we offer. If you're interested in just, about our new products, see that we have a new item section. And a lot of the products that I talked to you about today are in that section. And just have fun. Sex is about having fun, and it brings people closer together. And I talked about it doesn't have to be something so... It's not that complicated. And I think that oftentimes we just make it complicated, or we're afraid to approach our partner, and don't. You'd be surprised that your partner was probably thinking about, talking to you as well about using a product. And so just explore and have fun.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right, that does it for today's episode. I hope you all enjoyed this conversation and found it useful. Thank you so much for listening. Next week, we will hear from clinical psychologist Dr. Lori Watley on how we are all addicted to our devices and how to break that addiction. So super relevant and very important topic in general, but then especially right now as we are all at home and probably spending more time on our devices than we used to be. Please, if you enjoyed this episode, give the podcast a rating or write a short review. That helps a lot in the podcasting world and also means the world to me. So please take 2 seconds and do that. You can also reach me at thebetteryoupodcast@gmail.com. You can follow on the socials, Facebook and Instagram at The Better You Podcast. And yeah, that is it. I will see you all next week.